And back to our top story tonight. Quebec Finance Minister unveils his economic update. $2.3 billion in all will be going back to taxpayers. And joining us for more on this is Valée, the Quebec director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So we're seeing some modest tax cuts, if you could call them modest, $250 more per person, $100 per child. To sum it all up, and you say it's a step in the right direction.
Yes, it is. I think we could have seen a little bit more, but I think we're going to take it. So you're right to point out that they're not huge. But anytime that we see money coming from the actual government into the pockets of taxpayers who have worked hard to earn that money, we think it's actually a good thing. So again, we're hoping to see a little bit more in the spring of 2018, but for now, we're going to take them.
And this was all promised. More specifically, Quebec promised to dedicate 50% of any future surplus to tax relief during the last election campaign. So the finance minister tonight claims it has, in combination with the measures announced in the last fiscal update. Do you agree that they have fulfilled their promises, their tax cut promises?
They have actually kept 50% of their promise, because in the 2014 election campaign, in the platform of the PLQ, they've actually said that any surplus will be going towards 50% in tax cuts, but also 50% towards the reimbursement of the debt. Now, what we've seen today is that they have not held up on the other 50%, which is the reimbursement of the debt. That is actually a pretty huge factor, because every year we taxpayers pay up to $10 billion in interest payments, which is actually money that we're throwing out of the window. It's not going towards the healthcare system. It's not going like in education. It's literally money that is leaving our pockets for absolutely no other purpose than to reimburse like interest. So that part of the promise was actually not really respected today. But we've seen is that they've actually respected the part about tax cuts. So we're hoping that we're going to see the other 50% maybe next spring, hopefully.
One other thing you guys are pointing out is that there's no cohesive plan to reduce Quebec's dependency on equalization payments, and you think that should be addressed by this government?
So that is a very important point. Every year, the Quebec government spend about $103 billion. 11 of those 103 are actually coming from the hands of the other provinces, because we are highly dependent on what you have just described. So it is time for us to actually address that issue, create wealth, create the actual conditions for like entrepreneurs to be able to flourish here, with like a lower tax rate, maybe a little bit less red tape as well. That is something that has not been addressed today, and we're hoping that it will be addressed eventually, because we have to aim for like fiscal autonomy. I think that we should aim for.
You know, Carlos Letao was talking about how, and the Quebec government is often attacked for cutting spending to public programs. He says he's just slowed spending, that spending has actually increased year after year. I'm going to take a different angle on this. Should the Quebec government have cut public programs more in order to put more money into Quebec taxpayers' pockets?
I think it really depends on which are the programs that you're going to want to cut. Now, he is right to point out that all he's done is slow down the growth of the increase of the rates of all of the actual spending. But is there any space to reallocate some of those funds? I mean, just last week, the Quebec government actually announced $1.5 million for an interpretation center for a highway in the eastern part of the province. Now, I think a lot of people could argue that that $1.5 million could have been spent better otherwise. So I think there's room for improvement. Now, I think most of us would actually argue that we would like to see more for education, more for like healthcare, also our roads, but I think that money can actually come from elsewhere. It does not have to come from tax hikes or actual cuts.
All right, thanks a lot for your insight tonight, Valée from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.